He was the cigar-chomping bulldog who stared down Hitler. The defiant voice, crackling over the radio, promised blood, toil, tears, and sweat. Winston Churchill, wartime hero, orator, and icon of British resolve. But behind the myth lies a far more complex, controversial figure, a man of towering strengths and shocking flaws. Churchill's legacy encompasses both the salvation of Europe from Nazi tyranny and the starvation of millions in British India. Brilliant and brave, yet also arrogant and prejudiced. A leader whose soaring words inspired a nation, but whose callous actions condemned countless souls to misery and death. As the war-ravaged skies cleared over Europe in 1945, the world celebrated Churchill as democracy's savior. Yet in the scorched villages of Bengal, the name Churchill evoked only the spectre of indifference and neglect. While Britons hailed him as the vanquisher of Hitler, Indians cursed him as the architect of famine. The full measure of the man eludes simplistic labels of good and evil. To understand Churchill is to grapple with the darkest depths and most brilliant heights of human nature itself. How nobility and mendacity, heroism and cruelty can reside within a single heart. Born into aristocratic privilege in 1874, young Winston was no stranger to adversity. His father, Lord Randolph Churchill, was a prominent politician, but a distant and disapproving parent. Winston's childhood was marked by loneliness and a desperate yearning for his father's approval. These early trials forged an iron will and an unshakable self-belief that would carry Churchill through the crucibles to come. As a young officer in British India and Sudan, he thrilled to the adventure of empire, his dispatches from the front lines sparkling with wit and bravado. But even then, the shadows that would haunt his legacy were already apparent. Churchill's unquestioning faith in British imperialism blinded him to the suffering it inflicted upon those it subjugated. He dismissed the victims of colonial exploitation as a beastly people with a beastly religion. It was a pattern that would repeat itself with tragic consequences decades later. When Churchill's imperial hubris met its match in the unyielding realities of war. As the newly appointed Prime Minister in 1940, he inherited a nation on the brink of defeat. Its armies routed by Hitler's blitzkrieg, its cities smoldering under the Luftwaffe's bombs. In that darkest hour, Churchill's indomitable spirit and soaring rhetoric were the light that guided Britain through the storm. His words electrified the nation, rallying it to defy the odds and stand alone against the Nazi juggernaut. "We shall fight on the beaches," he thundered. "We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." But even as Churchill led Britain to its finest hour, his blind spots and prejudices were sowing the seeds of future tragedy. In 1943, with the war still raging, a devastating famine descended upon the Indian province of Bengal. 3 million souls perished, their emaciated bodies littering the streets. The ultimate responsibility lay with Churchill's government in London, which callously prioritized food shipments to well-supplied British troops over the desperate pleas of starving Indians. When implored to send relief, Churchill brushed off the deaths of millions as the fault of Indians breeding like rabbits. It was a moral failing that would forever tarnish Churchill's legacy. A stark reminder that even the most towering figures can be brought low by their own prejudices and blind spots. As the war drew to its bloodied close, Churchill basked in the glow of victory, his place in history seemingly assured. But the British electorate had other ideas. In a stunning upset, they booted Churchill from office in 1945. Weary of wartime austerity and eager for a new direction. It was a bitter blow for a man who had given everything to lead his nation through its darkest trial. Yet in characteristic fashion, Churchill did not retire quietly into the shadows. He spent the next decade in the political wilderness, warning of the growing Soviet threat and advocating for a united Europe. In 1951, at the age of 76, Churchill returned to 10 Downing Street for a second, final turn as Prime Minister. It was a valedictory lap for a man whose life had spanned the most tumultuous decades of the 20th century. But even in his twilight years, Churchill could not escape the contradictions that had defined his life and career. While he played a key role in diffusing Cold War tensions, Churchill also authorized the CIA-backed coup that toppled Iran's democratically elected government in 1953, a decision driven by his zealous defense of British oil interests. It was a stark reminder that for all his visionary leadership, Churchill remained a product of his time and class, an unrepentant imperialist to the end. As the sun set on the British Empire, Churchill too began to fade, his prodigious energy finally betrayed by the passage of years. When he finally passed away in 1965, at the age of 90, the world paused to mark the loss of a titan. Crowds lined the streets of London to watch his funeral procession, a river of black coats and bowler hats flowing past the iconic landmarks he had helped to defend. But even as the world mourned, the legacy Churchill left behind was far from uncomplicated. To his admirers, he remains the savior of Western civilization, the indomitable lion who beat back the Nazi tide. To his critics, he is the unrepentant colonialist, the man who spoke of freedom while denying it to millions under the British Raj. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between, or perhaps it encompasses both these extremes. Churchill was a man of profound contradictions, a leader whose towering triumphs were matched only by his glaring flaws. In the end, maybe that is the true measure of Churchill's legacy. Not that he was perfect, but that he was human, that within one life, one person, could reside both the capacity for extraordinary heroism and the potential for staggering cruelty, that the same lips that could move a nation to strive for its finest hour could also utter the most callous indifference to suffering. To grapple with Churchill's legacy is to grapple with the conflicting currents of history itself. It is to recognize that even our most revered heroes can be flawed, and that even the most shocking cruelties can coexist with moments of profound moral courage. As we look back on the life and times of Winston Churchill, let us resist the temptation to reduce him to a simple caricature, either hagiographic or demonizing. Let us instead strive to understand him in all his complexity, his triumphs and his failings, his visionary leadership and his myopic prejudice. For only in wrestling with the full, messy truth of Churchill's legacy can we hope to learn from it. Only in recognizing the light and the shadow within him can we begin to understand the light and shadow within ourselves and within the world we have inherited from him. Winston Churchill, hero and villain, liberator and oppressor, a man who both shaped and was shaped by the tides of history. May we never forget the lessons his life has taught us, even as we strive to build a future that transcends the injustices and prejudices of the past. If you have enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and subscribe for more History Retold Badly.